Wherever we look, our world is facing a huge range of unprecedented challenges. So if you're a leader right now, how do you navigate your way through this? How do you make decisions in the teeth of so much uncertainty? How are you going to reconnect your people and rebuild your team so that they're fit to face the future? And what does it even mean to be a leader in such an increasingly challenging world? These and other questions I've been putting to top business leaders from across Europe, and I've had some surprisingly candid responses. So why don't you join me, Nisha Pillay, for the latest episode brought to you by Sherpany of The Agenda. My guest today believes that good leaders should not be afraid to reinvent themselves, and that's something he's done many times over. He's led companies at the very highest level, CEO level, across many different industries, from pharmaceuticals, financial services, and chemicals, just to mention a few. Currently, he is chairman of the Swiss Stock Exchange, the SIX, and a few other companies too. Let me introduce you to Thomas Wellauer. Welcome, Thomas. It's good to have you with us on The Agenda.
Hi, Nisha. Thank you for having me.
I really wanted to start our conversation today, Thomas, by asking you about that time when everything seemed to be going swimmingly. You were master of the universe at Credit Suisse, and then almost overnight, bang, deep trouble. You ended up losing your job as Credit Suisse ended up reporting huge losses. That was back in 2002, I believe. Can you take us back then? Tell us what happened, how you felt.
Yeah, I can take you back. I actually never forget that morning. You know, when you sit in front of your screen, typically there's one email after the other coming in. And that morning at about 7:05, it stopped. No more emails. That when it was announced that I was leaving Credit Suisse.
Is that how you discovered what had happened?
No, it wasn't how I discovered. I knew a few hours before, around midnight. And as you know how these things go, I mean, the board decides, and then the next morning it has to be announced at 7 o'clock before the stock market opens. So I knew, but I was sitting really in my office that morning, and it was absolutely amazing. My screen my emails just stopped coming in. It was a very defining moment because I obviously started to think a lot in the weeks and months thereafter about what had gone wrong, what should I have done differently, what mistakes did I make. And I think that reflection, in a way, that made me, I believe, it made me a better manager and a better leader afterwards.
Why do you say that? How did you change? What's the evidence that you became a better manager, Thomas?
I know how I was before and I know how I was after. It's kind of difficult to explain. I mean, you said it, the time before was not immediately before when I was leaving Credit Suisse, because that was a big crisis and that was in all the newspapers, and that in itself was a very difficult time. But before that, everything was going really well. I had a really very nice career, and then all of a sudden finished. And it's not only finished, but also Switzerland is a small country, and it was a very public ousting, and therefore also a very public failure. And I had to sort of really think about, where would I again be able to make a contribution and find a new job.
And what was that period like immediately after you had to leave Credit Suisse and you suddenly became a zero man? What did you have to cope with?
That was part of the experience. I mean, you all of a sudden realize what you always knew, but you realize it very directly, is that you actually are what your job is. And if you're not in the job anymore, no more invitations, no more events, no more emails. No one will ask you for a decision if you have nothing to decide. So that was in itself a very interesting experience. After that, on the one hand, as I said, I was reflecting a lot. I really spent a lot of time of sort of going into the history, what went well, what went not so well, what did I do right, did I do wrong, etc. And on the practical side, I used all the connections that I had and talked to many people about opportunities, trying to find a new a new position or a new way to get back into the flow of big companies.
So, how did you claw your way back into a responsible position, reinvent yourself, I suppose, and persuade someone to take a risk on you after such a public failure?
It was a bit of luck, and on the other hand, it was just persistency. I had many discussions, many people that were actually looking for someone with my profile shied away from hiring someone with who was such a public figure, negatively sort of looked at. And then at Clariant, the situation was different. The company was desperate. They were looking for someone. And it clearly helped. It was another industry. I think that made a big difference.
So,
And
Clariant is a
so
chemicals company, very different from
uh,
financial services, very different from Credit Suisse. But what was it that enabled them to overlook, as it were, if you don't mind me saying so, the kind of perfume of failure around you at the time?
I think it was a couple of things. One, it was that I had a background. I'm a chemical engineer by training, and I had worked in the pharma industry before, at least as a consultant. But I think it was more the necessity of finding someone who had, as they believed, the skills to help them run the restructuring and basically help save the company from bankruptcy.
Clariant was in a very difficult position, and this is not something that happened overnight. Several other top managers had tried to sort it out and not succeeded. So, how did you manage to turn the company around? What did you do differently, do you think, Thomas?
I think I approached it in a very analytical way, really spending a little bit of time analyzing the situation and then developing a program which was very, you could say very analytical, very fact-based, and a step-by-step approach to how we could turn around the company. And very detailed in many ways. And in that sense, I think also very credible to people.
And you had to persuade the employees, who must have been pretty cynical and apprehensive by then, to trust your plan.
Absolutely. I think this was about the third time around where they had tried to turn around the company. And as always in these situations, you have 10% who are ready to try it one more time. You have 10%, you can tell them whatever you want, they will not believe you. And you have 80% of the people sitting on the fence and saying, okay, let's watch what's coming. And then we'll make up our mind if we join or if we don't.
So, how those 80% of staff who are sitting on the fence view you, the new leader, is pretty important, isn't it? What do you
It
think
was.
you brought as a leader? What is it that leaders should be doing in that kind of situation to engage with the 80% who are so important?
What was really important was to be very transparent about the situation, very transparent about what went well, which was, also there are some areas which went well, and also be very transparent about where the issues were. That was sort of one thing. And the other thing is to then lay out a program which was clear of where we wanted to get to by when, but at the other hand also had intermediate steps where you could measure if we were on the right track, and then sort of going around and talking about this all the time. And I think what helped me also was that, as I mentioned before, I'm a chemical engineer by training.
Restructurings are really difficult things to do. No one wants to. Do you think you need a different kind of mindset as a leader to restructure than what you need to lead a company which is expanding and growing?
I'm not so sure. I think at the end it boils down always to the same ingredients. You sort of have to understand where the situation is. Then you have to sort of build your belief, your own belief of where you want to take the company to, and eventually you'll have to explain it. So you have to tell it to whoever needs to know about it, and you have to do that very, very consistently. So it takes, I guess, a very analytical mindset at the beginning to understand where you are. You need self-confidence once you've sort of shaped your beliefs. And it takes good communication skills when you need to explain the story to people. I think the story is really important. But the story has to be founded in facts. I don't think you can tell people something great and they will just believe it and follow you. It has to be grounded in facts.
You're a very analytical person, clearly. Storytelling is also important to you. Where does creativity come in this mix? Is it important for managers, for leaders?
I think it's actually very important. And I think the fact that you can imagine where you want to take a company to, and then also how you want to do it is a very creative act. You know, there's this saying about thinking out of the box, which is certainly true, although, you know, if you go too far from the box, I think it becomes a bit of fantasy. But I think this is it is a very creative act.
So being able to take that leap of faith, being able to project into the future is a key part of leadership then, I think, from what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely. 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 I think that that's actually a very important part of leadership.
I want to ask you about the different aspects of your life. You've done so many things, worn different hats, and reinvented yourself, as I said earlier. 12 years a consultant at McKinsey and very successful at that, banking, chemicals, pharma. You now sit on various boards, including chairman of the stock exchange. Do you need different leadership styles in these different roles?
One of the most important things is to be authentic. I don't think you can have a style which you copy from someone else. So at the end, you have to be yourself. And that's what I think makes you a strong leader, that people believe what you say and what you show is you. So I don't think I have different leadership styles in different situations. I am sure I have developed over time and have become a different leader marked by experience and especially in my case, many different experiences.
Who would you be today, do you think, Thomas, if things hadn't gone so very wrong for you at Credit Suisse back in 2002?
That's a very good question. It's actually a question I asked myself a few times also. Obviously, difficult to say, but I truly believe that, you know, being thrown back and in a sense, despite that or since that experience, having this sort of nagging fear of doing the wrong thing, I think has actually kept me from being maybe a bit more prudent in some situations. Thinking about something one more time before deciding on it and before doing it. And I think that has been very, very helpful. Self-confidence is important, but it can also take you to sort of losing touch with reality. And I think having had this kind of experience of failure and then as a consequence, this sort of nagging fear of doing something which might take you there again is a very helpful experience.
The word losing touch has made me think about the big generation gap. I'm going to do a corner turn into a completely different subject now, Thomas. There's such a generation gap between most of the senior leaders of today and the talent pool that they're leading, the younger generation. They have different values, they have different worries, environment, for instance, very different social values. How does the leadership generation remain grounded and connected to the younger generation?
One way is your own children, because they are part of that generation you were just talking about. And I have three of my own, and I think to have a very good relationship, have a very intensive dialogue with them on all kind of topics, it keeps you in touch. And the other thing is also in the company. When you set up projects or when you have discussions, to make sure that you're not always talking to the same people, and especially not only to the people of your own generation.
What have your children challenged you on? What have your children got you to rethink? Because they can challenge in the way that nobody else can challenge, right?
I think it's less what they have done, and it's more sort of the imagination that something I could do, and they would sort of lose their trust in me as their father. And I think that keeps you from that keeps you honest in many ways.
I'm going to ask you now to make a leap of imagination, and that is to try and muse on what this post-COVID era we're living in, with increasingly virtual workspaces, what is it really going to mean in terms of leadership? How are leaders going to have to change their tools, their priorities to respond to this if this becomes the new normal, more or less permanent?
I'm not so sure this becomes the new normal. I think we'll go back to a mixture of physical and virtual. And I think for a number of reasons. One, I think people's memories are much shorter than what we think now. It's such a difference if you can have a conversation on a difficult topic or a creative topic, even more so, in a physical setting or in a virtual setting. So that's maybe the first point. Secondly, as long as you can have interactions one-on-one or maybe in small groups of, say, 2 to 4 people, virtual actually works quite well. If you go to larger groups, it becomes very difficult. You have to have an order, people have to speak in order. It becomes a very different style of meeting. And if then some people are physical and are on site and others are on the screen, it's even worse. So I'm not so sure that this will change much. I think it will be more challenging for leaders in order to decide where's the right balance between people's wishes to work more from home and the company's needs to have people on site in order to have also informal meetings.
Thomas, our podcast series is called Leaders on Leadership. So I wondered, is there a final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
One thing which which I often find in discussions with younger people is they all talk about leadership, and I always tell them, but don't forget, in order to be a good leader, you also have to be a good manager. And I think John Kotter once said, management is coping with complexity, and leadership is coping with change. And I think if you're not able to organize a company or your tasks or whatever in a way that your own people believe that you do that in a way that is efficient, it's effective, it's very difficult then to take people and lead them into change, to go into completely new territories. So that's maybe one thought which I would just make sure that would like to make sure that people understand.
Thomas, thank you so much for being candid with us. It's been a pleasure having you with us on the agenda.
Thank you very much, Nisha.